Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this public defense. I wanted to welcome the ambassador of Ghana. I'm not sure whether she has already arrived. Someone knocking on the door as they continue. And I would also like to welcome Professor Steven Oelenbroek from UNESCO IHE, Director of Academic Affairs and representing Director of IHE. The dissertation project is a joint undertaking. The candidate has worked for his PhD project at IHE, and therefore I very much welcome him. Of course, you have all switched off your telephones, including my colleagues behind the table, that's the audience as well. But would you please check another time for me whether it is really switched off? I declare the meeting open, and I welcome you, Mr. Samson Odura Kwarteng. You may start with giving a brief exposition of your research, of your reasons for having undertaken it, and of the results it has yielded. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Rector, Magnificus, members of the Plenary Doctoral Committee, members of the Academic Board, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm highly honored and delighted to be called upon to defend my PhD thesis entitled Private Sector Involvement in Urban Solid Waste Collection, Performance, Capacity and Regulation in 5 cities in Ghana. The delivery of public services has traditionally been carried out by the public sector alone, but governments in developing countries fail to deliver efficient and better service due to non-competitive markets, inadequate capacity, increasing financial burden, and budget maximization. Private sector involvement, PSI, in public service provision evolved to deal with market failure and government failures. The private sector provision, the private sector provision is regulated to correct market failures such as non-excludability, negative externalities, information asymmetry, and natural monopoly associated with public good nature of solid waste service. The public sector is playing a leading role of regulation and expenditure with citizens through subsidies and user charges, whilst the private sector is taking on an increasing role as provider of services. It is believed that private sector involvement seeks to bring market competition, private sector management expertise, and private finance into public service delivery. However, the intended benefit of PSI, such as efficiency, better service quality, and reducing financial burden on the state, most of the time not achieved in developing countries due to problems of capacity, regulation, and investment risk associated with private finance. Many developing countries are still struggling with public services, especially solid waste management, and Ghana is no exception. Studies conducted on solid waste management in developing countries, for instance in Kenya by Karanja and Inwinji, and in Tanzania by Kasim, in Rwanda by Gafishi, and in Ghana by Awochi and Ogre Opare, point to service delivery challenges. The local governments which are responsible for solid waste management face major challenges associated with providing adequate access to solid waste service for citizens, especially in urban communities. Poor quality and unsustainable solid waste service delivery is norm rather than irregular occurrence in urban communities. In Ghana, for instance, significant proportion, about 30% of the population as of year 2000, did not have access to solid waste service, and those with access always complain about the quality of the service. The hypothesis of this thesis is that private companies with adequate capacity for service provision may not achieve high performance when weak regulatory practices exist and when contractual obligations are not adhered to. Companies delivering public service cannot always be more efficient without regulation, incentives, performance monitoring, sanctions, and rare effort of the private sector to apply management techniques. If inter-organizational arrangements and regulatory practices are not well structured to provide legal and financial incentives, private sector involvement may not achieve much. So, the main objective of this research was to examine the evolving involvement of private sector and the factors explaining the private sector performance in solid waste collection. Specifically, the research was, one, to explore the evolving practices of involving private sector and households in solid waste collection for sustainable service delivery. Two, to analyze the productivity and service quality of private companies involved in solid waste collection. And three, to examine and identify the internal and external factors explaining private sector performance. The study was conducted in 5 cities in Ghana: Accra, Tema, Takoradi, Kumasi, and Tamale. And these cities were selected because of their rapid organization and expansion. Qualitative and quantitative data were collected from 25 companies and also from the information from the assemblies, the local governments. Household survey of 1,500 households was also conducted in the 5 cities to assess service quality and cost recovery mechanisms. Mr. Rector Magnificus, results on private sector performance show that there was a significant difference in service quality across cities, and that the service quality of franchise service for house-to-house collection was higher than that of the service contract for communal collection. The service quality was compromised where capacity of the companies could not cope with the increasing wage generation, even though high productivity was achieved. The results suggest that internal factors such as companies' experience, scale of operation, and supervision capacity lead to high productivity. Results on the involvement of private sector shows that there has been an increasing role of the private sector over the past 2 decades, with more than 60% of the waste collected by the former private sector. Notwithstanding the increasing involvement of the private sector, the bottom-up approach to user involvement to pay for service, monitor service quality, and separate waste as source has been slow. Results on regulation show that there were weak regulatory practices and weak adherence to contractual obligations, and these were unsigned contracts, delay of subsidy payments, weak enforcement of bylaws, regulatory capture by interest-seeking politicians and assemblymen, among others. The results suggest that regulatory capture exists in contracts, since some companies had contracts signed and received regular payments, whereas others did not. The weak regulatory practices do not provide incentives for full cost recovery and private sector investment in new vehicles, and does not enhance better service delivery. The unsigned contract and delay in payments make it difficult for the private sector to get funding for new vehicles or trucks. There is, however, a gradual well-functioning system being put in place with a recent competitive bidding, sign-up contracts, and citywide user charging. The shift towards cost recovery in the past 4 years through user charging, through pay-as-you-throw charging in Kumasi, and monthly fixed charges in Tema and Accra. The pay-as-you-throw approach has potential for full cost recovery in low-income communities. The solid waste collection problem of developing countries is not only lack of investment, but the absence of bottom-up approach to user involvement in charging and service quality monitoring. 6 conclusions are drawn from the findings. 1. Service quality is compromised even though high productivity and technical efficiency may be achieved. 2. Internal factors that were identified were the company's experience, scale of operation, and supervisory capacity. 3. There has been an increasing role of the private sector over the 2 decades, but the involvement of households has been slow. 4. There were weak regulatory practices and weak adherence to contractual obligation, and these consequently provided no incentive for full cost recovery and better service quality. 5. There is a gradual well-functioning system being put in place with recent competitive bidding, sign-up contracts, and citywide charging. The pay-as-you-throw approach for both communal collection and house-to-house collection has potential for full cost recovery than the monthly fixed charges which is being practiced in some of the cities. 6. The solution to the problems of solid waste management hinge on adherence to formal rules of the state, use of pay-as-you-throw cost recovery mechanism, promulgation of legislation on recycling, and restriction of regulatory arrangements to ensure bottom-up approach to user involvement and bylaw enforcement. The study contributes to knowledge by providing understanding of the linkages between private sector performance and factors of regulation and capacity necessary for improved service delivery. The implication of the performance is that for a company to be rated as a well-performed one, it has to achieve both high productivity and better service quality. The increasing involvement of the private sector was not commensurate with households' involvement in service provision. The implication is that the full cost recovery and better service quality to be achieved, the companies first of all have to adopt bottom-up approach to orient the customers and be more responsive to service delivery. The implication of the weak regulatory practice is that the service quality is compromised. Investment in new vehicles cannot be recovered, and this is disincentive for private sector growth and development. The theoretical implication of this regulatory practice and weak adherence to contractual obligations by the assemblies or the local government is that the power relation imbalance and regulatory capture influence the